interview in Austria for the class of 14-year-old girls who interviewed a Holocaust survivor. These 14-year-olds were from a school in Bad Schallenbach near Linz. You, so young, so bright, so Alice and shy, so brave to learn the truth. You who have barely entered your teens, the guilt of the country heavy on the heart. And yes, together we unburden, because I too carry the burden, the guilt of the survivor. It's not what we said, but what we didn't. And here's one I wrote the first time I was in Hull, invited to the festival. And when I left, I fell in love with that little clown town, as I called it. So here it is. In Hull, in Tyrol. She is king of the mountain. He is queen of the castle. She is goddess of the heartbeat. He is salt of the earth. They meet in the marketplace, bow one to the other. They stand on their heads, rest on their crowns. Upside down fools, keeping the balance of tears and of laughter with a sprinkle of salt. They are the voice of the poem. They are the silence between the lines.
Ruth Weiss is a German-born poet, performer, playwright, and artist who made her home and career in the United States as a member of the Beat Generation, a label she has recently embraced and that is used frequently by historians detailing her life and works. Weiss spells her name in lowercase as a symbolic protest against law and order, since in her birthplace of Germany all nouns are spelled capitalized. Born to a Jewish family, Ruth Weiss spent her early childhood fleeing her home in Germany along with her parents due to the rise of Nazism. Their will to survive took them from their home in Berlin to Vienna, and eventually they wound up in the Netherlands. After the Netherlands, Weiss and her family left for the United States. In 1939, they arrived in New York City and from there left to Chicago. Weiss went to school in Chicago and excelled academically, graduating in the top 1% of her class. However, Weiss was unable to finish school in Chicago due to the fact that they moved back to Germany in 1946. This time, when they arrived in Germany, they were not known as German citizens, but they were now American citizens. Her parents worked for the Army of Occupation. Weiss did not let this stop her. She continued her education in Switzerland and spent much of her time hitchhiking and writing, two skills that would eventually prove pivotal to her future in the American Beat Generation. 2 years later, in 1948, Weiss and her parents moved back to the United States, resettling in Chicago.
After leaving home in 1949, heading towards Chicago, she went to the art circle and began trying different things with poetry and jazz. She left Chicago heading towards San Francisco, where she started getting along with street musicians. Some of her friends opened a club by the name of The Cellar, where she could engage in her poetry sessions every Wednesday night. Growing tired of being in the city, she left to a place Jack Kerouac made famous, called California's Big Sur. With this, she published in one of the first magazines for beat writers called Beatitude. Continuing this, she met Kerouac in 1952, and according to her, they had a fantastic connection on multiple levels. This connection occurred 2 years after he published his first novel, but she had no idea of this. Instead of speaking about this, which would be expected of the two, they conversed about haiku dialogue, which is a very short form of Japanese poetry, and discussed this over wine for hours. During this time, Neil Cassidy would show up, and the three would occasionally drive off and adventure down dangerous hills and just bouncing off of each other's vibes, having the time of their life. After having the time of her life, Weiss started a salon type of situation which created a space for writers and poets to get together and bounce off of each other's ideas and brag about what they have. And with this success, she later in this same year married her first husband, Mel Weigsman, who became a Zen priest later on. 2 years after marrying Weigsman, in 1959, she published her book, The Gallery of Women, honoring the women she most admired by painting portraits of them through her poetry, which was jazz-inspired.
As time went on, Leslie's finally finished with The Brink, a narrative poem which she later filmed for in 1961 with Paul Beatty's help. Although proud of her work, she believes her best work is Desert Journal. It's described as a mindset in the desert, which she spent 7 years on it, finally completing it in 1968 with being published in 1977. In 1990s, West won the Bay Area Poetry Slam and released recordings titled Poetry and All That Jazz. By 1968, The Brink was shown at the Whitney Museum.